Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Untitled Reviews. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are dramas. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Family Law, Season 2, Episode 8. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. This episode mainly revolves around Jerry. We kind of get a little more insight into Jerry's family circumstances. Jerry is trying to pick up things with her daughter, Christine. I think it's Christina, the older daughter, their older child. And it's apparently she was married to a guy named Bruce, who kind of was not too keen on having Jerry at the wedding and was filling Christina's head with, like, you know, some very transphobic nonsense. And because of that, it's like now Eleanor and Jerry were not able to be in Christina's life for a while, especially because it turns out she has a daughter. And it's like, wait, you're a grandmother, Jerry? And she's like, yeah, like Lila's about to be 3 years old, and this could be an opportunity to finally meet her, which obviously this is going to hit a little close to home, not a little, quite close to home with everything that Abby's going through because, well, her mom is handling the news of Frank doesn't want you around the kids. So she's trying to fight that. But for her, like, this is the first time she's being able to be around the kids physically. So she wants to kind of jump at this opportunity. So she knows what it's like to have a complicated situation where a grandparent can't see their grandchildren type of situation. So obviously, when Jerry comes back and it turns out that Christina wants nothing to do with Jerry, like, obviously Abby has to be who she is and sticks her nose in it. Because obviously it's like, because for her it's like, especially because how important Jerry is to her, it's like, all she's ever really known is like the good side of Jerry. It's like, no, you've been there for me, you go to meetings with me, you've been supportive of me, you've been the most supportive person of me at Svensson and Svensson. So for me, like, you know, and once again, going through what she's going through personally, of course she's gonna like be nosy in that regard. The actress who plays Christina, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that's the actress who played Susan in the show Van Helsing, if I'm not mistaken. There was something I feel like she popped up in fairly recently that I was watching, because I remember looking that actress up and being like, oh yeah, because I was like, why do I recognize this actress? And looked it up and knew. I was like, oh, you're Susan from there. And I might have saw that she was in Family Law, like in her filmography. Once again, it's just weird because I'm watching this in 2023, considering this came out last year. So it's just one of those things. But it's like, I'm trying to remember. I swear there was something super recently that I think she had popped up in, because I was like, I don't remember what reason did I look that actress up. Like, it had to be something because I was like, oh, she looked familiar, and I just couldn't remember what it was from. Nevertheless, but it turns out Christina's issues with Jerry aren't trans issues. It's like, I have no problem with that. It's like, but Jerry, it's like, whoa, why do you have an issue with Jerry? Which obviously complicates things, because it's like, oh, a lawyer showing up like that, especially making a point. Like, I wish Abby hadn't introduced herself that way, because it's like, you give off the wrong message when you're like, yeah, I'm a lawyer. You could have just been like, hey, I'm a friend of Jerry's. I guess it's like, you add more validity. You don't want to be like, oh, I'm just some random person that walks up. I guess you want to be like, hey, I work with Jerry. That was kind of the point you're trying to make. But by throwing out there that you're a lawyer, you complicated things. So Jerry was not too happy. I mean, even Harry told Abby, do not get involved. She asked you not to get involved, but Abby had to get involved regardless. And so, ultimately, because Jerry's still under the belief, like, Christina wants nothing to do with me because of my trans situation. But it's like, no. It turns out it gets more complicated when Jerry goes over with Abby and finds out, wait, Eleanor's here. Like, wait, how long have you been seeing our daughter and our grandchild behind my back? And it's like, I've been trying to smooth things over. I was like, interesting, because she needed help. And so it's like, and I think that speaks volumes, and we kind of understand a little bit more why she went to Eleanor and not to Jerry. And so I love that Jerry left Abby there. I was like, that's kind of sucking. I mean, understandable, like, Jerry's in an emotional state right now. Once again, understandable, but it's like, kind of left her there. And she even had to ask Eleanor, I was like, can you give me an Uber? Because it's like, yeah, you were kind of my ride here and my ride back. So, but ultimately, they do have a sit down, because Harry was able to kind of play mediator and convince Christina to have a therapy session with Eleanor, Jerry, and with Lucy kind of being the therapist in that situation, because obviously Harry was someone that Christina like has a good relationship with, so he was able to kind of bridge that middle ground, especially as a grandparent who only recently was able to get to know his grandchildren, not really being there in his daughter's life. And I love that she's like, oh, I'm glad that things between you and Abby are repaired, but it's like, I wouldn't go that far. But she's like, yeah, but it's a different circumstance. And it turns out it is, because during the talk, we find out what this is all about for Christina. It's Jerry's drinking. Jerry was depressed and just dealing with a lot. Like, I don't know if that stemmed from Jerry's, like, maybe some, like, I don't know if, like, maybe back then it could still have been tied to, like, maybe her identity issues, maybe. Or maybe it's just, like, there were just other issues at hand, but Jerry doesn't remember, like, she was abusive and scary. Like, she never laid a hand on Christina, but she terrified her, because it's like, right, one moment you could be my best friend, and then the next time you could be like a monster. And Eleanor remembers all this, but Jerry doesn't, because Jerry like didn't remember any of that because she was drunk at the time. And that's sad and understandable why Christina would have like her reservations. Why? Because she has this view of Jerry, like, because Jerry never knew how bad things got, because Eleanor's like, well, it was all in the past. You worked so hard to become a better person. Like, why would I trudge up bad memories like that? And even Jerry's like, did I ever hurt you? She's like, no, you never physically laid a hand on me. And Eleanor's like, you didn't lay a hand on her or the other kids. But it's just like, Christina's like, it messed me up. And it's like, I don't want that for Lila, you know? And even Jerry understands. It's like, I'm not that same person anymore, but it still doesn't change the fact is I did what I did. And it's kind of like, I have to suffer the consequences. Even if that means I can't be in my granddaughter's life, I completely understand why my daughter, who has this trauma associated with who I was, like, it's understandable, especially at a young age, if that's going to stay with you your entire life, and it sadly poisoned their relationship, you know? But Jerry is a very different person. Jerry even said, like, I've been sober for like 20 some years, you know? It's a very sad situation, and it's like, I mean, I think it's a great example of like, yes, someone can change. Because I think, I mean, especially because it's like, right, because she doesn't remember those times when she was blackout drunk, and she was never told about those, because it's just like, it was a very dark period in her life. But it is that thing of, I think it is a thing of Jerry now, like, I might not remember that, and I might be a different person now, but that doesn't change. I did what I did back then for whatever reason, maybe because I was depressed, and how I coped with it was medicating myself with alcohol, you know, so. But I think it is a prime example of people can change for the better, you know? And I think especially how that parallels with Abby. You know, Abby is a better person. Once again, she's still her snarky self, but she's grown as a person. Like, you know, like, your vices don't have to fully define you, but it's understandable. I think that was kind of interesting, like, misdirect, because you'd be like, right, because, I mean, doesn't change the fact that Bruce probably was transphobic. Now it makes you, well, because there's probably, because no one liked him. Eleanor didn't like him, Jerry didn't like him, and even Harry didn't like him. But now it makes you wonder, like, how much of that was really like, hey, Bruce didn't want Jerry at the wedding. Was that as an excuse? Because Christina was dealing with her trauma associated with Jerry? Or was it just like, no, he was legitimately transphobic? But the fact is, Christina was like, that has nothing to do with it. It makes me go like, maybe he wasn't as transphobic as everyone thought he was. Maybe he was kind of shitty in some regards, but maybe because even Harry was like, yeah, like, I'll represent you during your divorce, because obviously he's going to try and pull out every dirty trick in the book. So it seems like regardless of it all, it seems like he's a scumbag, but maybe he's not that much of a scumbag, or maybe he was, but maybe it's just like, right. Christina didn't have the best perception of Jerry regardless. And so it's like, right, you kind of hating on Jerry for one particular reason, it sucks, but I have no love lost when it comes to my mom. So like, there's no issue there. So maybe that's why, that was kind of a non-issue in some capacity. I don't know. It's kind of an interesting, situation. Like I said, because I also like that because I think that's also interesting too, to kind of get this complicated layer to, because we've seen Abby and her alcoholism. Like, obviously we got a tiny peek into it at the beginning of the series, and we've never really seen how it was over the years. Jerry, we've only known this version of Jerry and learned like, oh, how bad things were at one point in time, to a point that even Jerry didn't know how bad things were. I thought that was kind of an interesting insight, but also once again a representation of just like, right, how much alcohol can, like, a vice can, do how much damage it can do, like more damage than maybe anyone can realize, but also just once again proves that how powerful how powerful change is and how different a person can be. So at the end of the day, though, it's like, right, they are taking baby steps. Christina's going out with Jerry for coffee, because at the very least, it's like, it's going to be a baby step situation. But I think Jerry being who she is now, it's like, it's going to work out. So I love Abby being like, I'm sorry for like meddling. And Jerry's like, no, you're not. She's like, I'm sorry that things blew up. But Jerry's like, we kind of need it blowing up, because it's like there was so much here, so much beneath the surface that we weren't dealing with. And even Jerry was just going to kind of accept things for they are. But it's like, if she did, like, things wouldn't be progressing like they are. So Abby's interference, her meddling, worked out nicely. Other elements to the episode, I love the whole thing of like, there's these two brothers that are fighting over like an inheritance from their dad, and Harry and Chip, and there's like a safe, but neither one of them knows what's in it, because there's like a $50 million like inheritance or something, but they can't split it down the middle just because they refuse to, because it's like, no, it was meant to be mine. It's like, no, it's meant to be mine. One has the safe, one has the password. It's like, it's literally split down the middle, and like, I have part of what we need, but rather than coming together, we both won't nudge. So Harry and Chip end up being the third party, meet at the middle, and Vincent, and they open the safe. I love it. I even love Chip being like, man, they could easily just like split the money and be fine with 25 mil each, but they can't. And he's like, I'm glad that I only have one kid. But Harry being like, it's going to be a bloodbath when I go. It's like, yeah. I don't know how much Abby would really gun for that. Her mom would probably push her to like, no, get what's yours. It might be, I'm sure Lucy very like, probably lived very modestly, so she probably would never fight. It's probably, I don't know how, like, it could easily, because you could actually see that becoming a nasty thing, but I think Abigail would just go for what she's owed just to piss off Daniel. He's the one that would probably fight the most for it, but it's like, yeah, it probably would be a complicated situation, but it's like, Abby would only fight for it just to piss off Daniel, because he'd probably be like, well, I deserve it more. And she'd be like, oh, if that's really how it is, that would probably also incite Lucy to really battle more. But I think those two would kind of like step back for different reasons, Abby and Lucy. But, if push comes to shove, which Daniel is who he is, it probably would end up being a situation that he would kind of incite something, and they'd be like, you know what, bet we're going to end up like, it's going to turn into the three-way battle that it is. So that is probably something interesting to think about. But yeah, I love that it ended up being kind of like adult magazines. I don't want to go as far as saying porno magazines, but they seem like they're kind of like, maybe like some, essentially Playboy magazines equivalency of. I wonder is that what those really were? Well, I mean, once again, they might have just straight up been porno magazines, but that was what was in his safe. I mean, I'm sure that they even said like, oh, these might have to be appraised because they might be valuable. It's like, they're probably like out of print and stuff like that. So they might be valuable in that regard. But it's also interesting to be like, oh yeah, like, you expect, when I saw the books, I was like, are they going to be comic books? No, porno mags. It's like I said, if they're in fact porno mags, they might not be, but it's like interesting. That was what was in your safe. And I love that, Chip is just kind of laughing about the whole situation. So I thought that was really interesting. I love that Abby had to go to this party that she legitimately didn't want to go to. Especially complicated thing too is that Frank was going to be there. So that's why she didn't want Aiden to go, because it's like, right, don't want to start a pot any more than I already have. But Cordelia was like, no, bring Aiden, because it's like, yeah, it's going to probably piss off Frank. It's like, you're so manipulative. It's like, well, to be fair, it's like, once again, he's coming with that heat. He's coming with the spice. It's like kind of, let's kind of like throw a little spice his way. So, and it does bother him seeing Aiden there. And because he's also trying to control himself at such a public event, but he's like, oh, you're trying to like embarrass me on your way out. Because they bring it up in this episode. She's only got like 3 weeks left at Spencer and Spencer, that she's like, up like, with Harry kind of being her supervisor in that regard. When she breaks it down, she's like, well, it's actually 19 days. So I was like, oh, I guess by the end of this season, she'll be kind of free to kind of go off and do what she wants to. So, But Frank was heated about that. Because Abby had an extra reason for not wanting to go. The party's being held at the same hotel she found Frank and Felicity at in the season 1 finale. So it's like, of course. So, interesting. And Frank didn't have much to say the moment she threw that in his face. He was just kind of like so miffed. And she's like, yeah, let me go back to Mr. December. Because I love Cordelia's guy. Oh, like, hey, you must be Aiden. Oh, Abby hasn't told me enough about you. Because she was just rubbing it in everyone's face. This is the first time Daniel got to meet him. It's like, oh, how'd you meet? Oh, putting on a fire for one of our clients. One of our clients. It's like, okay, Daniel. And it's like, oh yeah, he was Mr. December on the firefighter calendar. It's like, she's kind of swooning a little bit because she knows Frank's nearby. She's probably like, oh, like, let's really lean into it. Like, She probably did her own research on Aiden and stuff like that. So she was really excited to bring him just to show off in front of Frank. But yeah, Frank was so miffed. You could see him just like drinking his champagne. It's like, for one, and he's like, oh, you're embarrassing me. And it's like, shut up, Frank. Shut your face. Once again, it's like, yes, Abby has made her mistakes, but she's done so much to kind of grow from that. I don't know how much you've really done to kind of make up for the cheating. Like, you're more in the wrong. That's also why I'm like, I get more pissed at Frank. He's more in the wrong than she is. And yes, she's made her mistakes, but she's working towards it. She's been sober for a long while now. Obviously, it is a lifelong battle, but she's taking the right steps. Like, have you really taken, like, I guess in his mind, it's like, I try to take the right steps with us going to therapy, but it's like, even in those therapy sessions, what were you doing? You were trying to, not even trying, successfully throwing. That's what it was. The actress who played the therapist in that episode a couple episodes back, I was trying to remember what it was because she popped up in Riverdale, but I was watching something recently, I couldn't remember what it was that I'd seen her in recently, and just like, oh, she just happened to be in like the series finale. She makes a small appearance in the series finale of Riverdale. So regardless, I just clicked in my head. I was like, all right, that's what it was. Either way, once again, timing being interesting. Once again, this came out last year, so just funny situation. But either way, it was all like hunky-dory and fine and everything, and it just kind of like, Abby was super hyped about it, happy about it. It's like, oh, she's in a good place. I was like, please don't let there be some reveal about Aiden being a bad, but it's like, no, the reveal about Aiden is he's living in he's sharing a place with people, like, and Abby kind of like, almost kind of like, oh boy, like, it's almost like, it's not a frat house, but I can almost see her looking at it like one, like, oh, you don't have your own place. You're roommating not only with one person, but 2 people and 2 dudes. And who knows, like, how bro-y that place gets. So I don't know if that's going to be an issue. I mean, for one, we don't know, like, Aiden's circumstances fully enough. Like, maybe there's a reason for that, or maybe it's just like, nah, these are my boys, these are my bros. I just happen to share the place with them. But it's also kind of like, yeah, coming over here is going to be an issue, because anytime we went, it's like, right, when we were doing our sexy time, there was 2 other people in the house. So that's kind of like, so you can tell that kind of rubbed her the wrong way. So I don't know if that's something else they tackled in this episode. Once again, I always have to stress this. There is like at least one scene typically, usually like only like a minute or so, taken out of like the original version of the episode, so they can make more time for ads on said network that this is airing on in the US. Obviously, not trying to promote any certain channels under struck companies currently, so I'm trying to avoid saying any networks names. So they do that. So, like I said, I don't know if that's something that maybe Abby brought up in this episode, or very least is going to be an issue definitely going forward. So, I thought that was kind of interesting, because that's the last time we see it, just her having breakfast with all 3 of them, and it's just kind of like, okay, this is weird and awkward. So, I mean, yeah, like, I guess because it's like never really crossed her mind of like, oh, I should probably have to ask about your living situation, because she just assumed he was living by himself. So there's that angle to things. About her mother ends up like moving out because the entire episode, Winston is trying to find a place for her, like a motel she can stay, or a hotel she can stay at, with a pool for her and the kids. But everyone was booked because of Dennis and stuff like that, which I love that he tried to pretend like, oh, she was one, but it's like, yeah, that still was kind of a no-go. And it's just like other places they trying to find didn't work out. Cecil ended up pointing out one, but it's kind of like do we really have to? But no, like Joanne is like, no, like you stay at my place, I'll stay with a certain friend. So it's like, okay, things are moving in that positive direction. Because she's like, yeah, the only reason why she kind of really let that slide is because, like, this person happens to be, like, very well off, so. But Abby's like, yeah, I'm not going to stop fighting for this. Like, you deserve to be able to see your grandchildren, especially after this episode. That's going to, like, light it even more of a fire. Like, it was never like, oh, she wasn't going to do it. She was going to do it, but she's even more motivated after this Jerry episode. Another angle to this episode is the whole situation with Daniel and, is it Clyde? Craig. I don't know where I got Clyde from. Craig the dog. And Kyle shows up, and him and his partner, they were having that whole back and forth about Craig, and now they've split, and he wants Craig back. But it's like, no, you left him at a shelter to be euthanized, and Craig wants nothing to do with him because he tries to go for Craig, but Craig snaps at him, and it's like, no, you're not going to have your way. And so he tries to, like, manipulate the situation to be like, oh, Daniel manipulated the situation, kind of used me just so that he can get Craig. It's like, you left Craig. I went through the adoption process. It's like, well, you should have notified me that you were going to do that. It's like, why? You left him at the shelter knowing what that would mean. And so I took the opportunity to take Craig. I'm kind of giving him a loving home. And so they try to kind of basically blackmail him. And they say, like, hey, you give us this amount of money. It's like $5,000 plus. And it's like, okay, it's a very specific amount. Or we're going to basically blast you on the internet and kind of destroy your reputation. So it's like, oh, that's such a dick move. And so Abby ended up being his representation in this because he couldn't represent himself in this because he, because he doesn't want to seem like this is because he doesn't want to spoil, like, especially because he's made such a point of, putting himself in this position as a partner, especially how complicated his relationship has been with his dad recently, and he doesn't want to give his dad any more ammunition against himself, so he's not trying to bring any more bad press. Not any more bad press, but he doesn't want to, like, rock the boat even more than what they are, so. Luckily, he gets to keep Craig, which also, Abby was super mean, being like, oh, that dog's, like, got not much life left, so why don't you get, like, I was like, come on, don't do that. Because throughout the episode, Daniel was comparing, he's like, what would you, like, what if someone wanted, like, to replace Nico or something? She's like, are you really comparing my actual child to yours? It's like, don't do that. Dog parents can be like that. I'm not going to bring up the whole, like, it's not a apt description, but it's still the thing of when you love something like that. I'm not going to compare people's loves. They're like, oh, your love, don't compare my love for my children to your love for your dog. It's like, especially for Daniel, who doesn't have, like, a lot in his life right now. He has his work, and to have someone to put all his love and attention towards, that's never a bad thing, And so the whole point was to kind of, because she figured as much. It's like, right, this is just a shakedown. He doesn't actually want Craig. He just wants the money. That's what this is all about. So it's like, call his bluff. It's like, fine, we'll give you Craig back. And they had a meeting, and I love they had, like, almost like this Western style high noon showdown. Him taking off the shades. He's got a Daniel's got a lollipop in his hands, and they're just, like, staring each other down. And luckily, Daniel was able to walk away, no problems, and he gets to greet Craig. So I thought that was just kind of a sweet, beautiful angle to the episode. So I thought that was kind of pretty neat. So I'm excited to see where the next episode takes us going forward with all of this. I doubt that's going to be a continuing storyline, but still, the other aspects of the episode is going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. But I'm wrapping it up, almost completely forgetting about there's one more angle to this episode, the Lucy side of things. I almost let that slip my mind when Maggie came to her about they are already separated, but now it's like, filing for divorce. She found something online, pretty simple. It's like, let's not get your family involved in this. You come from a family of lawyers. But Harry was like, no. Let me kind of check this out. It's like, cool, she doesn't want you to have any, like, financial obligation towards the baby. Good. And so he kind of gets her he writes up a deal. It's like, it's based on what Maggie said, but obviously puts things more in Lucy's favor of, like, okay, you only have to pay up to, like, a month's rent because you're not even living there. So, no obligations to baby. But for Lucy, it's like, I make more than Maggie does, so I want to help her, because at the end of the day, it is that thing for some people of like, when you've been with someone, when things kind of go sour, you want no ties to that person. You're dead to me. Whereas other people, it's like, depending on how long you've been together, it is that situation of like, are we just going to throw that out the window? Am I supposed to just like pretend like I don't care about you? So for Lucy, it's like, regardless, I want to keep paying for at least like 18 months or something, because like, there's no way Maggie would be able to afford that apartment on her own if I'm not there to kind of help pay for that. So I want to help. It's like just Lucy being just the kind-hearted person she is. I think obviously there's a little bit of guilt involved in that, but it's also like, no, like you are someone that I still love. I think it hit Lucy hard too, because she was kind of hoping like this time apart, giving her space, like maybe things could work out, but like obviously getting the paperwork, just kind of like the Frank and Abigail of it all, just makes it real, like, oh, this is happening. So, but Harry was like, right, you're feeling this way now, but in 2 years you won't feel that same way. So he's trying to help her like be in a better position, because if you try and like give too much wiggle room of precedence of like you're setting with this, it could come back to bite you 2 years from now, where you don't feel the same way about Maggie. It's still so fresh, so you're still coming from an emotional standpoint, where he's coming at it from a more logistical standpoint. But it's like, you can't remove emotions from it, like especially at this point in time when it's so fresh, and especially when Lucy wants things to work out. Sadly, at the end though, she shows up at Maggie's place. Luckily, she still has a key and it still works. Maggie's bleeding, and it's like, that's not good. Because that's obviously a telltale sign of something might be going on with the pregnancy, which for Lucy, it's probably like, that's going to be complicated, because it's like, right, you don't want to leave her in such a vulnerable place, because she would need someone like Lucy at that time. But it's like, how do you juggle that situation? That's going to be complicated, especially in the aftermath of like, what if something happens to the baby, you know? It's also complicated too, because you're a therapist, and I'm sure you'd want to try and help, but I think you being the ex and a therapist and trying to help, like, I think Lucy has enough self-awareness to be like, I definitely can't be the one to be there. I'd have to recommend a therapist to her or something like that. I think, like, she would never cross that professional boundary in that regard, and especially with the personal, because it would be conflict of interest, because, you know, you can't be, like, therapizing, like, your ex like that, so I'm hoping for the best, that like nothing happened to the baby, but obviously that's a scary and sad sign that kind of end the episode off on that. We'll ultimately have to wait to see where that, as well as everything else ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. To the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.